The greatest threat to independent thought isn't censorship, it's comfort. Carl Jung once warned that people don't have ideas, ideas have people. And today, his words feel more true than ever. We live in an era where thoughts spread faster than we can understand them, where other people's opinions slip into our minds so easily that they begin to feel like our own, where algorithms curate beliefs as if they were products on a shelf, where agreement is cheaper than reflection, and where the ability to think for ourselves is quietly fading, not because someone forces us to be silent, but because someone has made thinking unnecessary. Tonight, we're going to explore why we now copy opinions we never formed, why people feel confident in ideas they never chose, and how we can reclaim that quiet, profound freedom, the freedom to think on our own. We are living in a moment when the world speaks louder than the individual mind, a moment when the global conversation is so constant, so intrusive, so overwhelming, that our own thoughts begin to feel small by comparison. And somewhere within this noise, a quiet shift has taken place. People are no longer forming ideas. They are inheriting them. This is the age of borrowed thinking. It happens subtly, almost invisibly. We browse, we scroll, we absorb. Opinions pass across our screens like waves, and without noticing, we start carrying them as if we discovered them ourselves. A sentence here, a headline there, a comment thread, a trending video, each one leaving a faint imprint on the mind. The modern person rarely sits alone with an idea long enough to make it their own. Thoughts arrive, pre-shaped, pre-packaged, emotionally polished for quick consumption. It is not that we are incapable of thinking independently, but that the environment no longer demands it. For most of human history, forming an opinion required effort. It meant gathering information, reflecting on experience, comparing perspectives. We learn slowly, through conversation, through books, through silence. A belief was something grown, not adopted. But today, the world offers ready-made beliefs in endless supply. They come with pre-attached emotions, identities, communities, enemies, hashtags, and moral certainty. You do not have to think. You only have to choose which set of thoughts feels most comfortable. And in a world flooded with information, comfort often wins. Borrowed thinking becomes the path of least resistance. One reason this shift is so powerful is that the human brain is designed to conserve energy. Thinking deeply is metabolically expensive. Copying is efficient. When an idea already feels polished, already feels familiar, already feels validated by thousands of others, the brain experiences relief. Less effort, more certainty. The mind prioritizes ease over inquiry. But there is another force at work, the constant presence of other people's thoughts. Never before has the human mind been so exposed to the beliefs, emotions, and reactions of strangers. In every moment, we witness what others think about everything. Politics, morality, identity, culture, tragedy, joy. This constant exposure creates a psychological illusion that we should have an opinion immediately on everything. And when time is short, when information is overwhelming, when emotions are high, the quickest way to form an opinion is to copy one. Borrowed thought masquerades as personal conviction, yet inside, something starts to shift. People feel more certain, but less grounded. More opinionated, but less informed. More vocal, but less connected to the origins of their beliefs. The tragedy is not that people repeat ideas. Humans have always learned through imitation. The tragedy is that we repeat ideas without ever touching their substance. We inherit the conclusion without understanding the process. We carry the answer without ever hearing the question. In this way, borrowed thinking becomes a silent form of intellectual dependency. Another force fueling this age is speed. The world moves too quickly for the slow, careful formation of thought. By the time we begin to reflect, a new story appears, a new argument, a new crisis, a new emotion demanding attention. Independent thought requires stillness. Borrowed thought thrives in motion. Speed has become a substitute for depth. Platforms are built to reward immediate reactions, not careful reasoning. To respond slowly feels almost irresponsible, as if reflection is a form of disengagement. But reflection is not disengagement. It is the only way to escape manipulation. And yet, in a world optimized for speed, independent thinkers become outliers. Another subtle cause of borrowed thinking is emotional influence. When an idea comes wrapped in passion, outrage, pride, belonging, identity, it bypasses rational evaluation. We feel the idea before we understand it. Emotion makes borrowed thought feel personal. An argument that moves us emotionally becomes ours, even if we never examined its logic. The feeling becomes the proof. This emotional adoption of ideas is one of the most powerful forces shaping modern belief systems, because it creates a shortcut to conviction. I feel this, therefore it must be true. But feeling is not the same as knowing. In this age of borrowed thought, the greatest risk is not that people will be misled. Misinformation has always existed. The risk is that people will stop noticing that they are being shaped at all, that they will mistake inherited beliefs for independent ones, that they will lose the ability to trace their own thoughts back to their source. And when we cannot see where our ideas come from, we cannot change them. We cannot grow them. We cannot test them. We cannot make them truly ours. The decline of independent thought begins not with censorship, but with convenience. Not with force, but with fatigue. Not with ignorance, but with abundance. But the human mind has not lost its ability to think independently. It has only lost the habit. The spark of original thought still exists beneath the noise, waiting for space, for silence, for intention. Independent thought is not extinct. It is simply quiet. If we want to understand why independent thinking is fading, we have to begin with something uncomfortable yet deeply human. The brain is naturally lazy, not lazy in the moral sense, but lazy in the biological sense. Its primary mission is not to discover truth. It is to conserve energy. For most of human history, this energy-saving instinct kept us alive. Thinking deeply was reserved for moments when survival demanded it. The rest of the time, the brain relied on habits, shortcuts, traditions, and inherited wisdom. We didn't analyze everything we couldn't afford to. Reflection was a luxury. Today, however, the environment has changed faster than the brain's design. We no longer face immediate physical threats. Instead, we face an overwhelming flood of information. And in this environment, the brain responds exactly as evolution prepared it to. It avoids effort whenever possible. This avoidance shows up most clearly in the way we form opinions. Independent thinking requires slow, deliberate, energy-intensive mental work. It demands searching, questioning, evaluating, comparing, challenging our own assumptions. It requires patience. It requires humility. It requires time. Borrowed opinions, on the other hand, are cognitively cheap. They arrive ready-made, calm, prepackaged with emotional framing. They require no internal struggle, no personal reasoning, no uncomfortable uncertainty. They offer instant clarity without the hard work of understanding. The brain loves this. It is efficient. It is effortless. It is easy. And in a world of constant stimulation, ease becomes irresistible. Another reason the brain prefers ready-made opinions is the problem of cognitive overload. Modern life bombards us with more information than any mind can process. News cycles update every minute. Social media never sleeps. Every issue has 10,000 perspectives, each louder than the last. The mind becomes saturated long before it becomes informed. When overloaded, the brain has two choices: collapse into confusion or take the shortcut. The shortcut is simple. Adopt the opinion that feels most familiar, most emotionally satisfying, or most widely accepted. In overload, the brain chooses comfort. This comfort is also emotional. Thinking independently often means questioning things we want to believe, confronting our own biases, challenging the norms of our community. It means entering a space of uncertainty, a place that feels psychologically unsafe. But borrowed opinions shield us from that discomfort. They give us a sense of certainty, belonging, and emotional security. They allow us to say, I already know, even when we have not thought deeply at all. This emotional reward reinforces cognitive laziness. The mind begins to associate effort with discomfort and ease with correctness. Another factor behind cognitive laziness is pattern recognition. One of the brain's most powerful tools. When we encounter new information, the brain immediately searches for familiar patterns, familiar stories, familiar explanations. If it finds a match, even a weak one, it stops thinking. It fills in the gaps with assumptions. It constructs a belief without bothering to analyze the details. Pattern recognition saves time, but it also kills independent thought. The brain is constantly whispering, "This looks familiar. No need to investigate. This sounds like something I already believe. No need to reflect. This aligns with my group. No need to question." And so thinking stops before it even begins. Cognitive laziness is also amplified by the speed of modern life. Independent thinking is slow. Borrowed thinking is fast. Speed has become a virtue, slowness a flaw. Today, hesitation is seen as weakness, nuance as confusion, reflection as indecision. People feel pressured to respond instantly to every debate, every trend, every global event. And when speed is required, copying is the only method that fits the tempo. Another subtle force behind cognitive laziness is ego protection. Independent thinking exposes us to the risk of being wrong. Borrowed opinions protect us. If we repeat what everyone else says, we are safer socially. If we adopt the stance of a tribe, we gain the tribe's approval. If we echo the ideas of confident strangers, we borrow their certainty. The brain is wired to avoid embarrassment, conflict, and rejection, and so it avoids independent thinking. But despite all these pressures, cognitive laziness is not destiny. It is a habit, a powerful one, but a habit nonetheless. And habits change when we become aware of them. The first step toward independent thought is not intelligence, nor education, nor talent. It is simply noticing when we are choosing the easy path. It is noticing when we adopt an opinion too quickly. It is noticing when we agree because it feels comfortable, not because it feels true. Awareness interrupts the autopilot, and once autopilot is interrupted, even briefly, the mind begins to wake up. Independent thinking does not demand brilliance. It demands attention. Attention to what we believe. Attention to where those beliefs come from. Attention to the moment when comfort tries to replace curiosity. Because the mind is capable of profound thought. It simply needs to remember the taste of effort. Why we choose ideas with our hearts, not our minds. If cognitive laziness explains how we adopt ready-made opinions, emotional identification explains why we hold on to them so fiercely. Because in the modern world, beliefs are no longer just ideas. They are emotional possessions, psychological shields, even extensions of identity. We don't simply think our beliefs. We feel them. And once a belief becomes something we feel, the possibility of independent thought grows distant. To understand this phenomenon, we must first recognize something fundamental about the human mind. It values emotional safety more than intellectual accuracy. From an evolutionary perspective, belonging to a group was essential for survival. Agreement strengthened bonds. Disagreement created risk. To be cast out meant danger. To be accepted meant safety. This ancient instinct still governs much of our thinking. We don't evaluate beliefs purely on logic. We evaluate them on how they make us feel and how they affect our place within a group. Beliefs become anchors of emotional stability. One of the clearest signs of emotional identification is the speed with which we defend ideas we haven't examined. We defend them not because we understand them, but because letting them go feels threatening. A challenge to the idea feels like a challenge to the self. This emotional fusion between belief and identity is powerful. It makes borrowed opinions feel personal, meaningful, even sacred. The modern digital world intensifies this attachment. Online communities give beliefs immediate emotional reinforcement. Likes, validation, agreement, belonging. Every nod of approval strengthens the bond between idea and identity. Soon, we stop asking whether a belief is true. We ask whether it protects our emotional world. Another layer of this phenomenon is moral emotion. Some ideas come packaged with moral significance, the sense that believing them makes us good, righteous, compassionate, or virtuous. When a belief becomes tied to moral identity, independent thinking becomes dangerous. To question the idea feels like questioning our own goodness. Moral emotions override logic effortlessly. This is why people sometimes hold passionately to simplified narratives, even when evidence contradicts them. It's not stupidity. It's emotional self-preservation. Another powerful force behind emotional identification is fear. Uncertainty is psychologically uncomfortable. In a chaotic world, beliefs provide structure, a sense of control, predictability, meaning. People latch onto beliefs the way a drowning person clings to anything that floats. To form an independent thought requires facing the unknown. It means accepting complexity, contradiction, ambiguity, all things the emotional brain finds deeply unsettling. Borrowed beliefs feel safer. They come pre-approved by others. They spare us the emotional discomfort of asking hard questions. Fear turns ideas into anchors, even when those anchors are borrowed. But emotional identification does not always come from fear. Sometimes it comes from aspiration. We choose beliefs that match the identity we want to have. We imitate the ideas of people we admire, because aligning with them makes us feel closer to who we want to become. We copy the intellectual style of communities we hope to belong to. Beliefs become costumes we wear in search of acceptance. Yet the danger of this emotional attachment is clear. It makes independent thought nearly impossible. Once a belief becomes part of identity, the mind stops evaluating it. It can no longer approach it with curiosity or doubt. Any threat to the belief feels like a threat to self-worth or social belonging. Emotion shuts the door before reason can enter. Another subtle dimension is emotional contagion. Humans absorb emotions from others unconsciously. If a belief is expressed with passion, anger, joy, outrage, pride, that emotion spreads, and the belief spreads with it. The emotional tone becomes more persuasive than the content. This is why viral ideas often spread not because they are true, but because they are emotionally charged. Emotion delivers the ideas straight into the heart, bypassing the mind. And once emotion is attached, changing that belief becomes painful, almost like grieving a loss. But despite its power, emotional identification is not something we are trapped in. The first step toward reclaiming independent thought is noticing when a belief feels too personal, too fragile, too sacred to be questioned. That fragility is not a sign of truth. It is a sign of emotional ownership. Independent thought requires the courage to separate what I believe from who I am. We can feel deeply, but think separately. We can care about ideas without letting them consume our identity. We can hold beliefs while still allowing them to evolve. When we detach emotion from belief, something remarkable happens. Curiosity returns. Openness returns. The mind begins to breathe again. Because independent thinking is not the absence of emotion, it is the refusal to let emotion do all the thinking. Why thinking for yourself feels dangerous. If independent thinking was simply a matter of intelligence or curiosity, the world would look very different. Many people are capable of thinking deeply, questioning assumptions, and forming original ideas, but they don't. Not because they lack the ability, but because they understand something the modern world makes painfully clear. Thinking for yourself comes with a price, and for most people, that price feels too high. Humans are social creatures. We survive through connection. Belonging is not a luxury. It is a biological need. To be excluded, rejected, or isolated once meant vulnerability, even danger. Even today, our nervous systems respond to social threat as if it were physical harm. This is why independent thought can feel risky. A new idea does not just challenge the world. It challenges your relationship with the world. The first social cost is disapproval. When your thoughts diverge from the group, you become noticeable. You become unpredictable. People may question you, criticize you, distance themselves from you. Even subtle discomfort from others can create pressure to conform. In group settings, families, workplaces, online communities, disagreement often feels like disruption. Humans instinctively avoid disrupting the group. The second cost is misunderstanding. Independent thinkers often struggle to communicate ideas that do not fit into familiar categories. Nuance, complexity, and originality rarely translate cleanly into quick conversations or online discussions. People may misinterpret your intentions, assume extremes, or accuse you of beliefs you don't hold. It becomes easier to stay silent than to constantly explain yourself. Silence is socially safer than complexity. Another cost is loneliness. Independent thought requires distance, emotional, intellectual, sometimes even physical. When you question what others accept, you step away from the comfort of shared assumptions. This distancing can create a sense of standing slightly outside the world, observing it rather than participating fully in it. For many, that feeling is too heavy to carry for long. Belonging often wins over truth. There is also the cost of conflict. When your ideas challenge someone else's beliefs, especially beliefs tied to identity, tension emerges. People may respond with defensiveness, anger, or hostility. Disagreement becomes personal, even when you never intended it to be. Most people avoid independent thought because they want peace, not conflict. Then comes the cost of responsibility. Having your own thoughts means you cannot hide behind the crowd. If you are wrong, the mistake is yours alone. If you speak up, you cannot escape accountability. Independent thinking requires the courage to stand behind your conclusions, even when they are imperfect. It is easier and safer to say, everyone thinks this, instead of, I think this. Social safety dilutes personal responsibility. Another cost is the loss of simplicity. Borrowed opinions are straightforward. Independent thought is messy. It raises new questions, exposes contradictions, and forces you to revisit old assumptions. This complexity can create internal tension, the kind of tension many people prefer to avoid. Independent thought introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is There is also the subtle cost of visibility. When you think differently, you stand out. In the modern world, standing out invites scrutiny. People might judge you, label you, argue with you, or watch you more closely. Online, a single unconventional comment can draw hundreds of strangers into your life. Original thought attracts attention, and attention is not always welcome. But perhaps the deepest cost of all is identity disruption. Beliefs are woven into who we are. To question them is to question ourselves. To change them is to change who we are becoming. Independent thought requires confronting the discomfort of self. Many people fear the consequences of changing their mind. And yet, despite all these costs, independent thinking remains one of the most essential human abilities. It is the foundation of scientific discovery, creativity, ethics, and wisdom. It is what allows societies to progress, individuals to mature, and cultures to evolve. So the question becomes, how do we reclaim independent thought without breaking our need for belonging? The answer is not isolation. It is selective courage, choosing moments when truth matters more than comfort. It is intellectual humility, the willingness to question ourselves as much as others. It is finding communities that value depth over conformity, places where disagreement is not a threat, but a catalyst for understanding. And it is learning to tolerate the small discomforts that come with thinking for ourselves. Independent thinking will never be the easiest path. It demands courage in a world that rewards conformity, clarity in a world that rewards noise, patience in a world that rewards speed. But the reward is profound. A life that feels genuinely yours, because the real cost of independent thought is social, but the cost of abandoning it is internal. And only one of these costs can be carried without losing yourself. How social pressure online shapes what we think. Conformity has always existed. Long before the internet, people aligned their beliefs with those around them. Family, community, religion, nation. Social harmony depended on shared assumptions. But in earlier eras, conformity was limited by geography and proximity. It had boundaries. Today, those boundaries are gone. The digital world has created a new form of conformity, faster, louder, more visible, and more psychologically invasive than anything that came before. It is conformity not just of action, but of thought, not because we are forced, but because we are conditioned. In the digital age, conformity is woven into the architecture of the platforms themselves. The first mechanism is visibility. Online, our opinions are no longer private or whispered. They are public performances. Every post, comment, or like becomes a signal of who we are, what we believe, and which tribe we belong to. When every belief becomes a public act, self-expression shifts into self-curation. People begin editing themselves, not to be honest, but to be acceptable. Visibility amplifies, so you do not simply think. You think in front of an audience, and because audiences reward certain emotions, certain viewpoints, and certain tones, the mind gradually adapts its thinking to match what is rewarded. The second mechanism of digital conformity is quantification. Approval is no longer invisible. It is counted. A belief with 10,000 likes feels correct. A belief with 2 likes feels questionable. The human brain has never been designed to ignore numerical social feedback. We see numbers as evidence, even when they represent nothing more than algorithmic luck. Quantified approval turns opinion into currency. And in this economy, people trade authenticity for agreement. The third mechanism is the speed of collective reaction. In traditional communities, social pressure took time. A rumor spread slowly. Consensus formed over weeks. Now, reactions are instantaneous. One controversial idea can trigger a global wave of outrage within minutes. This speed creates a constant threat. Think carefully, or be punished quickly. People learn to pre-filter their thoughts, to avoid anything that could be misunderstood, misinterpreted, or taken out of context. Independent thinking becomes dangerous, not because of censorship, but because of consequences. The fourth mechanism is emotional amplification. Digital platforms reward strong emotions, anger, pride, sarcasm, indignation. Moderation is drowned out. Nuance is ignored. The middle ground disappears beneath a flood of emotional extremes. And people adapt. They match the emotional tone of their environment. If everyone is outraged, you feel pressure to be outraged too. If everyone is certain, you feel pressure to be certain too. If everyone mocks dissent, you learn to fear dissent. Conformity becomes emotional. The fifth mechanism is tribal identity. Online communities are no longer based on geography. They are based on belief. Each group has its narratives, symbols, enemies, shared language, moral codes. Joining a digital tribe gives people belonging, validation, and a sense of clarity in a complex world. But every tribe demands conformity. To belong, you must think like the group. Complexity must be simplified. Nuance must be abandoned. Independent thought becomes a risk to community cohesion. The sixth mechanism is algorithmic reinforcement. Algorithms create echo chambers, digital environments where we hear only what we already believe. This constant reinforcement creates an illusion. If I see this idea everywhere, it must be the truth. Beliefs become self-confirming. In echo chambers, independent thought does not simply disappear. It becomes unnecessary. The final mechanism of digital conformity is fear. Not fear of punishment in the traditional sense, but fear of isolation, ridicule, misunderstanding, or reputation damage. The digital world remembers everything. A single mistake can haunt someone forever. A single unpopular view can trigger a wave of hostility. So people police themselves. They stay quiet. They adopt the safest, most acceptable opinions. Conformity becomes a survival strategy. But despite the overwhelming power of digital conformity, something important remains. People still feel the faint pull of authenticity. The quiet desire to think for themselves. The subtle discomfort of knowing their ideas are borrowed, not built. Independent thought has not vanished. It has been pushed underground. The question is not whether conformity will disappear. It won't. The question is whether individuals can reclaim the small spaces where thinking is still possible, the private corners of the mind where no audience exists, no algorithm interferes, no tribe demands loyalty. In those small, silent spaces, conformity loses its grip, and the mind begins, slowly, to return to itself. Because independent thought does not start with courage. It starts with privacy. How we become trapped inside our own thoughts. One of the most defining and least understood features of the digital age is the quiet rise of echo chambers, psychological environments, where we hear only what we already believe, see only what confirms our worldview, and absorb only the ideas that feel comfortable, familiar, and safe. Echo chambers are not prisons built by others. They are rooms we gradually build around ourselves, brick by brick, without noticing. And once inside, it becomes incredibly difficult to think independently, not because we lose the ability, but because we lose the contrast that makes independent thought possible. To understand how echo chambers form, we must begin with something simple. The human mind seeks coherence. But the digital world has amplified it beyond anything our ancestors ever encountered. The first force behind echo chambers is personalization. Every digital platform from YouTube to TikTok to Google collects data about our behavior and uses it to tailor what we see. Watch one video, click one article, react to one post, and the system learns what you prefer. Soon, your entire information stream begins to resemble you. The world shrinks to fit your reflection. This personalization feels convenient, even helpful. But beneath the convenience lies a psychological trap. We stop encountering the unfamiliar. Without exposure to other perspectives, our beliefs no longer evolve. They kill. The second force behind echo chambers is emotional reinforcement. We are drawn to content that resonates emotionally, content that validates our fears, strengthens our hopes, or confirms our frustrations. Platforms amplify such content because emotional engagement keeps us scrolling. Emotion makes the chamber louder. Every time we click on something that matches our worldview, we strengthen the walls around us. The system learns. Show more of this, show less of everything else. We do not notice the walls building, only the comfort growing. The third force is social mirroring. Online, we gravitate toward communities that share our beliefs. These groups provide validation, identity, and a sense of belonging, but they also create social pressure. Disagreeing feels like betrayal. Once the group becomes our emotional home, independent thinking becomes socially risky. We begin to mimic the group's tone, vocabulary, and worldview. We internalize its narratives. We absorb its biases. Inside an echo chamber, the group becomes the filter through which reality is interpreted. The fourth force behind echo chambers is the illusion of consensus. When we see the same ideas repeated by thousands of people who think like us, it begins to feel like everyone thinks this way. We confuse algorithmic repetition with universal truth. The more we see something, the more true it feels, not because it is true, but because it is familiar. Repetition creates credibility, and credibility, in the digital age, is often nothing more than exposure. The fifth force is the disappearance of nuance. Echo chambers simplify the world into binaries. Right and wrong, good and evil, us and them. Complexity disappears. Ambiguity fades. Ideas become slogans. And when ideas lose complexity, the mind loses the ability to think beyond them. Independent thought requires nuance, but echo chambers reward certainty. The sixth force is cognitive comfort. Echo chambers feel good. They provide clarity in a confusing world. They reduce anxiety by giving the illusion of order. They confirm our identity. They make us feel understood, validated, seen. Thinking differently becomes uncomfortable not because the ideas are wrong, but because discomfort feels unnecessary when everything around us agrees. Comfort becomes a form of quiet indoctrination. The final force is the erosion of intellectual contrast. True independent thinking requires exposure to difference. Just as the eye can distinguish shapes only with light and shadow, the mind can distinguish truth only with opposing viewpoints. When all viewpoints align with ours, everything starts to look obvious. We lose the ability to see complexity. We lose the ability to question our assumptions. We lose the ability to recognize blind spots. We lose the ability to think beyond the walls we did not know we built. But echo chambers are not inescapable. Their power lies not in force, but in invisibility. The moment we notice the walls, cracks begin to form. Breaking free does not require abandoning our beliefs. It simply requires becoming curious about the beliefs we don't hold. It means seeking perspectives that challenge us. It means asking questions before offering conclusions. It means valuing truth more than comfort. Independent thought does not grow in environments where everything agrees with us. It grows at the edges where ideas collide, where complexity returns, where the mind encounters something unfamiliar and pauses long enough to ask, is this true? Or is this simply what I've been shown? In that small pause, the walls begin to open, and the mind, after being trapped in its own reflection, starts to rediscover the world again. To understand why independent thinking is fading, we must confront an uncomfortable truth. The digital systems that shape our attention, social media platforms, recommendation engines, content algorithms are built to reward imitation, not originality. Not because anyone set out to suppress independent thought, but because imitation is more predictable, more profitable, and far easier for machines to amplify. What algorithms reward, the mind learns to repeat. The first reason algorithms reward imitation is engagement, predictability. Original ideas are unpredictable. They can inspire, confuse, provoke, or go unnoticed. From the perspective of a machine trained to maximize attention, unpredictability is inefficient. It introduces risk. Imitation, however, is safe. It mimics patterns that have already succeeded. A familiar opinion, a popular format, a repeated narrative, these have proven their ability to attract attention. Algorithms can detect the structure of what works and promote it again and again. Originality is a gamble. Imitation is a formula, and in a system optimized for measurable outcomes, formulas always win. The second reason is emotional amplification. Algorithms prioritize content that generates strong emotional reactions. Excitement, outrage, pride, fear. Imitation thrives in this environment because emotional templates are easy to replicate. If one post triggers outrage, thousands of others can copy the emotional structure and achieve the same effect. Emotion spreads faster than insight. Original thought, which often requires nuance, reflection, or subtlety, struggles in such an environment. Its emotional profile is quieter. It does not spike engagement quickly enough to be rewarded. Algorithms elevate what is loud, not what is thoughtful. The third reason algorithms reward imitation is pattern recognition. Machines do not understand ideas, they recognize shapes. They analyze the structure of successful content, length, tone, keywords, pacing, emotional cues. They learn, unconsciously, what viral looks like. Once they identify that pattern, they promote content that resembles it. This means the moment a certain narrative, perspective, or rhetorical style becomes popular, the algorithm begins to replicate it, endlessly pushing thousands of similar pieces of content into the world. The digital landscape becomes saturated with variations of the same idea. Repetition becomes the measure of relevance. The fourth reason imitation thrives is social proof engineering. Algorithms boost content, not because it is true, but because it appears to be popular. Once something gains traction, even by accident, it gains visibility, and visibility attracts more engagement. Popularity becomes self-fulfilling. This dynamic encourages creators to mimic what already appears successful. Why risk crafting something original when the system clearly rewards what is already trending? In digital ecosystems, the safest path to visibility is imitation. The fifth reason algorithms reward imitation is tribal alignment. Algorithms learn which content resonates with specific groups and deliver more of it. This tailored distribution encourages creators to produce what aligns with tribal expectations. It reinforces ideological positions, emotional tones, and rhetorical styles. Creators shape their ideas to match tribal demand because that is what the algorithm rewards. Over time, entire belief systems become optimized for virality. Independent thinkers, who often challenge tribal boundaries, receive less visibility not because their ideas lack value, but because they disrupt the pattern the algorithm has learned to expect. The sixth reason is attention economics. In a world where attention is currency, algorithms prioritize content that keeps users scrolling. Imitation creates predictable consumption loops. People know what to expect. The content feels familiar. The emotional payoff is guaranteed. Original ideas, by contrast, often require slow thinking, something the attention economy cannot afford. The system is built to maximize consumption, not contemplation. So it rewards what can be consumed quickly, easily, without friction. The seventh reason algorithms amplify imitation is creator survival pressure. Anyone who wants to be heard, online artists, journalists, influencers, thinkers faces a simple reality. You must adapt to the algorithm or be ignored. And so, even intelligent, independent voices begin shaping their ideas to fit algorithmic patterns. Not because they want to imitate, but because they want to survive. The platform becomes the silent co-author of their thoughts. The final, and perhaps most troubling, reason algorithms reward imitation is the gradual erosion of cognitive resistance. When the mind sees the same kinds of ideas repeated again and again, they begin to feel natural, obvious, correct. Repetition becomes truth. The algorithm does not simply mirror culture, it molds it. It guides thought by shaping what people see and what people do not see. It trains the mind to expect sameness, to prefer it, to trust it. And slowly, without noticing, people begin to think less like individuals and more like the system that shapes them. But there is a way out. It begins with awareness, recognizing that algorithms do not reward what is true, but what is repeatable. That the system amplifies patterns, not wisdom. That originality will always struggle in a machine built for imitation. Independent thought, in this environment, is an act of resistance not only against the world, but against the mechanical forces that shape the world's attention. The question is not whether the algorithm can change. The question is whether we can think outside of what it rewards. Because the algorithm shapes what is visible, but only we decide what becomes real. Why the modern mind avoids intellectual risk. If imitation is the visible behavior, fear is the invisible engine behind it. One of the most powerful forces shaping modern thought is not ignorance, not laziness, not even conformity, but the quiet, persistent fear of being wrong. It is a fear that shapes our choices, our conversations, our beliefs, and even our silence. To think independently means accepting the possibility of error. And in the digital age, error feels more dangerous than ever. Being wrong today is not a private experience. It unfolds in front of thousands. It is documented, archived, searchable, replayable, and shareable. A single misstep, harmless, now carries the potential for humiliation, conflict, or social backlash. This fear changes how people think long before they ever speak. The first layer of this fear is social exposure. In previous eras, mistakes were witnessed only by those physically present. They faded with memory, softened with time. Now, mistakes are permanent. Screenshots preserve them. Feeds circulate them. Algorithms amplify them. When every opinion can be broadcast to strangers, disagreement becomes public judgment. And so people begin to avoid taking intellectual risks. They adopt the safest opinions, the most socially accepted positions, the most predictable viewpoints, not because they truly believe them, but because uncertainty feels dangerous. Conformity becomes a shield against potential humiliation. The second layer of this fear is identity, fragility. In a world where beliefs are tied to identity, being wrong feels like a threat to who we are. To admit error becomes psychologically painful. If this belief is part of me, then being wrong means something is wrong with me. This fusion between idea and identity makes intellectual flexibility nearly impossible. We cling to beliefs not because they are true, but because they protect our sense of self, and the cost of letting go feels too high. The third layer is emotional discomfort. Being wrong forces us into a place of cognitive dissonance, a clash between what we believed and what reality reveals. This tension is uncomfortable, even painful. Humans naturally avoid such discomfort. Borrowed opinions minimize the risk of internal conflict. If everyone else thinks this way, then being wrong feels less personal. Responsibility dissolves into the crowd. The fourth layer is the speed of judgment. Online, nuance rarely survives. There is no time to explain, clarify, or reconsider. People evaluate instantly. Good or bad, right or wrong, intelligent or foolish. This instant evaluation trains us to avoid saying anything that invites doubt. We choose certainty over curiosity because certainty feels safer. The fifth layer is fear of tribal rejection. Every digital community has boundaries and spoken rules about what can be said, what must be believed, what must be condemned. To question these rules risks exclusion. People fear being labeled as outsiders, contrarians, or traitors. It becomes easier to echo the group than to challenge it. Independent thought becomes a social gamble. The sixth layer is the disappearance of intellectual patience. Complex ideas require time to understand, and being wrong is often part of that process. But the modern world expects instant clarity. Changing your mind is seen not as growth, but as inconsistency. Admitting uncertainty is seen not as honesty, but as weakness. The process of thinking becomes compressed. People publish conclusions before forming arguments. They choose polished answers over uncertain exploration. The seventh layer is the loss of private space. In earlier generations, people thought privately before speaking publicly. They tested ideas in journals, conversations, and personal reflection. But today, the boundary between private and public thought has collapsed. People think as they speak and speak online. Every draft becomes a broadcast. There is no room for mistakes, and therefore no room for growth. The final layer of this fear is the illusion of omniscience. The internet creates the expectation that we should know everything instantly, and if we don't know something, we fear appearing uninformed. People pretend to understand topics they barely grasped because ignorance feels humiliating. To avoid being wrong, people pretend to be right. This creates a culture of performance rather than a culture of learning. Yet despite the weight of this fear, something liberating exists beneath it. The recognition that being wrong has always been part of thinking. It is the doorway to deeper understanding, the catalyst for intellectual growth, the engine of wisdom. No great thinker avoided error. No great discovery emerged without mistakes. No strong mind grew without questioning its own assumptions. Because the only people who never make mistakes are those who never truly think. How speed kills depth. If independent thought is fading, it is not only because we copy others or fear being wrong. It is because the modern world has quietly erased the conditions necessary for deep thinking. The greatest casualty of the digital age is not attention, but pace. Our minds are moving faster than they were ever designed to move, and in this speed, something essential is being lost. The ability to think slowly. Slow thinking is not a weakness. It is a method. It is the deliberate, reflective, analytical mode of thought that allows us to understand rather than react, to explore rather than repeat, to grow rather than imitate. But today, slow thinking is almost impossible. The first force behind the disappearance of slow thought is information velocity. In earlier generations, knowledge arrived gradually through books, conversations, lived experience. There were pauses, silences, spaces in which ideas could settle. Now, information arrives in an unbroken stream. Notifications, feeds, updates, alerts, they flood the mind every minute of the day. There is no silence between ideas, no pause between stimuli, no room for reflection. Thought becomes reaction. Reaction becomes habit. Habit becomes worldview. The second force is constant interruption. Deep thought requires continuity. It requires the mind to stay with an idea long enough to understand its shape. But modern life fractures attention into fragments. Each notification pulls us away. Each swipe resets our focus. Each platform competes for mental bandwidth. The brain, unable to maintain a stable line of reasoning, grows comfortable with superficiality. We skim instead of reading. We react instead of analyzing. We conclude instead of exploring. Slow thinking withers in the constant glow of interruption. The third force is the dominance of instant gratification. The digital world trains the mind to crave quick rewards, likes, views, messages, Slow thinking offers no such immediacy. It is quiet, effortful, invisible, and often uncomfortable. Why wrestle with a difficult idea when a more entertaining distraction is always just one tap away? The mind begins to favor stimulation over contemplation. The fourth force is the disappearance of boredom. Boredom once served a crucial purpose. It pushed the mind inward. In moments of stillness, people reflected, daydreamed, imagined, questioned. Boredom created the conditions for insight. But today, Boredom has been eliminated. Any idle moment is instantly filled scrolling, watching, refreshing, consuming. The mind never sits quietly with itself. Without boredom, imagination shrinks. Without quiet, insight evaporates. Without stillness, depth disappears. The fifth force is the commodification of time. Everything is optimized for speed. Fast news, fast content, fast opinions, fast outrage. Slowness is treated as inefficiency, patience as weakness, reflection as indulgence. In a culture obsessed with productivity, thinking becomes just another task to complete quickly. But thought cannot be rushed. Insight cannot be scheduled. Understanding cannot be accelerated. Slow thinking requires something the modern world rarely gives us: time without pressure. The sixth force is the rise of shallow mediums. Short-form content, tweets, clips, headlines. Reels dominates the attention economy. These formats reward immediacy, entertainment, emotional punch, but they cannot contain the complexity necessary for genuine thought. A mind accustomed to fragments loses its capacity for wholes. Slow thinking requires sustained engagement with long ideas, but the digital landscape rewards brevity over depth. The seventh force is constant comparison. People no longer think in solitude, they think in public. They evaluate their thoughts through the imagined judgment of others. This self-consciousness discourages slow exploration and encourages quick alignment. When thought becomes performance, depth becomes risk. The eighth force is mental exhaustion. The modern mind processes thousands of stimuli every day, far more than it evolved to handle. By evening, many people feel depleted, not from physical effort, but from cognitive overload. Exhaustion leaves no energy for slow thought. It drives the mind toward easy answers, toward repetition, toward imitation. Slow thinking requires mental space. Mental space requires boundaries. Boundaries require intention, and intention has become scarce. The final force is the loss of inner quiet. Slow thought emerges from silenced, the kind of silence that allows ideas to unfold naturally, without pressure, without noise, without interruption. But silence has become a rarity. People fear it, avoid it, fill it. Silence reveals the chaos inside, and many prefer distraction to introspection. Without silence, depth has nowhere to grow. Yet slow thinking is not cornet, is simply buried beneath speed, noise, stimulation, and pressure. Buried beneath a world that values immediacy more than understanding. To reclaim independent thought, we must reclaim the pace that allows thinking to happen. Slowness is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It is the soil in which clarity grows, the oxygen that insight breathes, the quiet from which wisdom emerges. A fast mind can react. A slow mind can understand. And understanding is the foundation of true independence. Why modern beliefs are expressions of who we want to be. If you want to understand why independent thought is disappearing, look not at intelligence, but at identity. In today's world, beliefs are rarely the result of careful inquiry. More often, they function as begised signals of who we are, who we admire, who we fear, and which tribe we belong to. Beliefs have become less about truth and more about self-definition. People do not ask, "Is this idea correct?" They ask, "What does this idea say about me?" This shift from inquiry to identity is one of the most profound psychological changes of the modern age, and it silently reshapes how people think, feel, speak, and relate to one another. The first force behind this shift is the human need for belonging. From birth, we are wired to seek connection. We survive through community, trust, shared values. Beliefs become the glue that binds individuals together. But the moment a belief becomes a requirement for belonging, questioning it begins to feel dangerous. Independent thought threatens the emotional foundations of the group, so people adopt the beliefs that secure their place. If those beliefs are shallow, borrowed, or poorly understood, belonging becomes more important than reasoning. The second force is identity signaling. In the digital world, our beliefs are displayed publicly, instantly, visibly. They become part of our personal brand, a way to shape how others perceive us. People adopt positions not because they examine them, but because they want to appear compassionate, intelligent, rebellious, moral, progressive, traditional, or whatever identity they aspire to. The belief becomes a costume, the idea becomes a mirror. When belief is identity, disagreement becomes identity rejection. The third force behind identity-driven thinking is tribal polarization. Modern society has fragmented into ideological tribes, each with its own language, heroes, enemies, and sacred narratives. These tribes are not built around careful reasoning, but around emotional alignment. To be part of a tribe, you must think like the tribe. To question a belief is to risk exile, and so beliefs hardened into unquestionable truths, not because they are supported by evidence, but because they are supported by group loyalty. The fourth force is the emotional comfort of certainty. Being part of a tribe simplifies the world. It turns complexity into clarity, ambiguity into certainty, nuance into slogans. Identity-driven beliefs reduce the psychological burden of thinking. They offer pre-made answers to complicated questions. They relieve people from the discomfort of doubt. But clarity purchased at the expense of independence is not clarity at all. The fifth force is moral simplification. Tribes not only shape what people believe, they shape what people believe is good. Beliefs become moral positions. To question a belief becomes morally risky. To change your mind becomes a crisis of conscience. To disagree becomes a sign of flawed character. When morality fuses with ideology, thinking stops. People stop asking what is true, and instead ask, what would a good person believe? The sixth force is self-protection. Identity-driven beliefs act as psychological armor. They protect the ego from uncertainty, complexity, and contradiction. If someone rejects your belief, you tell yourself they are misguided, immoral, uneducated. This protects your identity, but prevents your growth. Questioning becomes threatening, and curiosity becomes dangerous. The seventh force is the collapse of inquiry culture. Inquiry requires humility, patience, and a willingness to be wrong. But identity-driven thinking rejects humility. It replaces questions with statements, exploration with certainty, curiosity with performance. People do not seek understanding. They seek affirmation. Arguments become performances, not pathways to truth. Dialogue becomes competition, not collaboration. The mind closes even as the mouth stays open. The eighth force is algorithmic reinforcement. Platforms amplify identity-driven content because it generates engagement. They feed us posts that reinforce who we think we are. They filter out ideas that challenge our identity. Over time, our digital environment becomes a reflection of our own narrative. We do not just hold beliefs, our beliefs hold us. The final force behind identity-driven thought is fear of self-collapse. Changing a belief used to mean adjusting a viewpoint, but now, beliefs have become so entangled with identity that changing one feels like losing a piece of ourselves. People resist new information not because it is wrong, but because it threatens their self. When belief becomes biography, truth becomes secondary. And here lies the quiet tragedy. When beliefs serve identity, independent thought becomes impossible. You cannot think freely if thinking threatens who you believe you are. You cannot explore truth if truth risks destabilizing your image. But identity-driven thinking is not irreversible. The mind can reclaim its freedom by separating who we are from what we think, by remembering that beliefs are tools, not traits. Ideas are guides, not definitions. Independent thought begins the moment you ask, what if my identity doesn't need to be protected? What if it can expand? Because the strongest identity is not the one that refuses to change, but the one that is unafraid to grow. If independent thought has a birthplace, it is curiosity. Every idea we form, every perspective we explore, every insight we gain begins with a question. Why? How? What if curiosity is the spark that sets the mind in motion? It is the instinct that pushes us beyond the familiar, beyond the given, beyond the expected. But in the modern world, strangely, paradoxically, is disappearing. We live in an era where answers are immediate, abundant, and endlessly available. And yet people ask fewer questions than ever. We have access to infinite information, but we no longer feel the hunger to seek it. The first reason for this collapse of curiosity is answer fatigue. When everything can be Googled, searched, watched, summarized, or explained in seconds. The mind loses its appetite for exploration. We do not feel the mystery of not knowing. We do not experience the tension of uncertainty. We skip directly to the answer, bypassing the cognitive path that once gave knowledge its meaning. Answers have become commodities. Curiosity has become optional. The second reason is the illusion of understanding. The internet provides fragments of knowledge, short videos, headlines, summaries that create a false sense of comprehension. We feel informed after consuming content, even if we have not reflected or internalized anything. This illusion rewires the brain. I already know enough. Why question? Curiosity fades when the mind believes it understands more than it actually does. The third reason is the overload of stimuli. Curiosity requires mental space, quiet moments when the mind wanders, observes, notices inconsistencies, wonders about possibilities. But modern life provides no such pauses. Every empty moment is filled. Every silence is interrupted. Every wandering thought is replaced by something new, urgent, or entertaining. When the mind is constantly being fed, it never grows hungry. The fourth reason is emotional saturation. Curiosity is a gentle emotion, subtle, playful, open, but digital platforms prioritize intense emotions. Outrage, fear, excitement, tribal belonging. These emotions consume cognitive resources. A mind flooded with emotional stimulation has no bandwidth left for curiosity. Curiosity thrives in calmness, not chaos. The fifth reason is social pressure to appear knowledgeable. In a world where everyone performs intelligence online, admitting ignorance feels risky. People mimic certainty because certainty is rewarded. Doubt is not. But curiosity requires admitting, I don't know. When ignorance is treated like weakness, curiosity becomes dangerous. The sixth reason is instant validation. Curiosity once required patience, reading, experimenting, seeking, waiting. Today, answers and rewards arrive instantly. Instant gratification suppresses the slow burn of curiosity. Why explore deeply when shallow exploration provides faster pleasure? Curiosity is slow. The digital world is fast. The seventh reason is fear of cognitive dissonance. Real curiosity invites uncomfortable answers, truths that challenge identity, worldview, or social tribe. But identity-driven societies prefer certainty to discovery. Asking a real question risks finding an answer that hurts. Many choose comfort over curiosity. The eighth reason is the commodification of thought. In the attention economy, thinking is not valued unless it produces content. People are encouraged to have a take, not to ask a question. Curiosity becomes inefficient. Opinions become currency. The world rewards voices, not minds. The ninth reason is algorithmic narrowing. Platforms show us what they think we want. This creates informational tunnels where we encounter only familiar topics, familiar viewpoints, familiar narratives. Curiosity withers when nothing new enters the mental environment. Finally, the deepest reason curiosity is collapsing is the loss of wonder. In earlier times, the world felt mysterious, oceans unexplored, skies unmapped, cultures unknown, questions unanswered. Mystery fed curiosity. But today, the illusion of total knowledge has replaced wonder with fatigue. People feel as though the world has already been explained, even when it hasn't. But curiosity is not. Gunit is dormant. It waits beneath the noise, beneath the answers, beneath the overwhelm. It waits in small moments of stillness, when the mind returns to itself. Curiosity awakens the moment we allow ourselves to be ignorant without shame, to be uncertain without fear, to be open without defensiveness. Independent thought begins not with knowing, but with not knowing. It begins with noticing what feels incomplete. It begins with the quiet courage to ask a real question, even when no answer is guaranteed. Because curiosity is not the opposite of knowledge. It is the pathway to it. And without curiosity, the mind may still hold opinions, but it cannot grow. One of the most powerful psychological forces shaping modern thought is not logic, not evidence, not truth, but the impression of agreement. We are far more influenced by what we think others believe than by what we actually believe ourselves. And in the digital age, this perception has become distorted in ways previous generations could never have imagined. The illusion of consensus is the belief that everyone thinks this, that this is obviously true, that no reasonable person disagrees. But in reality, the world is far more diverse, complex, and contradictory than any feed, platform, or community reveals. Consensus has become an illusion manufactured by digital architecture. The first force behind this illusion is algorithmic repetition. Online platforms show us content similar to what we've already engaged with. If we click on a certain idea, we see it repeated again and again, thousands of voices echoing the same sentiment. Repetition feels like agreement. When we see an idea constantly, the brain interprets it as common sense. It doesn't matter whether the idea is accurate or even widespread. The algorithmic echo makes it feel universal. Exposure substitutes for evidence. The second force is social curation. People rarely share ideas that feel unpopular, uncertain, or nuanced. Instead, they post what aligns with their group, what earns approval, what avoids conflict. This creates a distorted impression of unity. The loudest ideas appear to represent the majority. The quietest ideas vanish from the conversation. But silence is not agreement. It is often self-protection. The third force is tribal amplification. When communities form around ideology, they reinforce each other's beliefs with extraordinary intensity. Within the tribe, consensus feels absolute. People repeat the same narratives, use the same language, defend the same positions. Inside the group, the worldview appears unquestionable. Outside the group, it may be virtually non-existent. Tribal echo chambers create islands of artificial consensus. The fourth force behind this illusion is emotional contagion. Ideas wrapped in strong emotion, anger, pride, outrage spread quickly. They dominate feeds, trends, conversations. Emotion signals importance. When a highly emotional opinion spreads widely, we assume the emotion reflects the majority. But emotional volume is not the same as numerical majority. The fifth force is performative certainty. Online discourse rewards confidence, not accuracy. People state their opinions with absolute conviction, leaving no room for doubt or introspection. This creates an environment where every viewpoint appears stronger than it truly is. When everyone performs certainty, humility feels invisible. We begin to believe consensus exists simply because nobody sounds uncertain. The sixth force is the disappearance of private thought. In the digital world, most visible thoughts are public thoughts, filtered, edited, and chosen for social acceptability. Private reflection does not appear on a feed. Quiet skepticism leaves no trace. Doubt has no metrics. We judge the collective mind by what people post, not by what they think. And people post what is safe. The seventh force is the fear of social isolation. People often mimic the beliefs they think are dominant to avoid backlash. A person may privately disagree, but publicly align. One person's fear becomes another person's proof that consensus exists. Fear creates conformity, and conformity creates the illusion of universal agreement. The eighth force is the minimization of minority voices. Algorithms prioritize content with mass appeal. Niche perspectives, complex arguments, or minority positions receive little visibility. But visibility is not the measure of truth. It is the measure of algorithmic compatibility. When ideas disappear from the public sphere, they appear non-existent then when millions hold them privately. The ninth force is the compression of nuance. Consensus thrives on simplicity. Digital platforms flatten complex issues into binary choices. For or against, right or wrong, us or them. This binary framing makes it appear as though there are only two possible positions, and that one of them is overwhelmingly dominant. Nuance becomes invisible, and disagreement becomes unimaginable. And the final, most subtle force behind the illusion of consensus is the brain's natural tendency to avoid social risk. When we believe everyone around us thinks a certain way, we feel pressure to align. We avoid questioning. We avoid exploring. We avoid dissent. The mind chooses psychological safety over intellectual freedom. But the most important truth of all is this: there is no true consensus. Not on politics, morality, identity, truth, meaning, or the nature of reality itself. Most people carry silent uncertainties, unspoken doubts, private contradictions. Many disagree quietly, cautiously, or internally. But the illusion of consensus convinces us that our doubts are rare, our questions are deviant, and our independent thoughts are anomalies. The illusion isolates us from each other and from ourselves. Yet the moment we recognize this illusion, it begins to dissolve. We realize that many people think differently than they speak, that public opinion is not private belief, that the loudest views are not the truest, and that independent thought is not as lonely as it seems. The collapse of true consensus is not a threat, it is an invitation to think freely, even when the world feels unanimous, an invitation to question what seems obvious, an invitation to discover what you truly believe beneath the noise. Because the greatest illusion of the modern age is not that everyone agrees, it is that you are the only one who doesn't. How we copy the structure of ideas without understanding them. If the disappearance of independent thinking were simply a matter of copying opinions, the problem would be easier to solve. But something deeper is happening, something more subtle, more psychological, more unconscious. People are not only copying opinions, they are copying the form of thinking itself, the tone, the style, the patterns of argument, the emotional posture without ever engaging with the substance beneath. This phenomenon is the mimicry of thought. It is the appearance of thinking without the effort of thinking. It is intellectual imitation, disguised as intellectual engagement. And it is one of the most significant forces eroding independent thought today. The first mechanism of mimicked thinking is emotional resonance. When an idea is expressed in a way that feels emotionally satisfying, sharp, confident, witty, outraged, morally superior, adapt not just the conclusion, but the emotional shape of the argue. We begin to speak in the same rhythms. We use the same phrases. We mimic the same rhetorical confidence. Emotion becomes a substitute for understanding. The argument feels correct because the emotion feels correct. This is why people often defend views they cannot explain. They are not defending the content. They are defending the emotional experience associated with it. The second mechanism is linguistic mimicry. Every ideological tribe has a vocabulary. Buzzwords, phrases, metaphors, slogans, tones of voice. Once we absorb this vocabulary, we can produce arguments that sound intelligent without actually being grounded in knowledge. The words create the illusion of depth. The syntax creates the illusion of reasoning, but the mind is simply using borrowed language to imitate the shape of thought. We speak in familiar patterns because patterns feel safer than questions. The third mechanism is narrative mimicry. Humans understand the world through stories, but modern narratives, especially those amplified online, are they follow predictable arcs. Hero versus villain, victim versus oppressor, insider versus outsider. These templates simplify complex realities into easy narratives. People begin to think in these templates automatically. Instead of evaluating a situation independently, they fit it into the familiar story shape. Reality becomes contorted to match the narrative. This kind of narrative mimicry replaces understanding with categorization. The fourth mechanism is argumentative mimicry. Most people do not construct arguments, they repeat structures of arguments they've seen before. For example, taking a single anecdote and treating it as universal using moral framing instead of evidence. Attacking motives instead of ideas, applying group labels instead of critical analysis. These are not thought. They are habits of thought, learned through repetition. The structure of the argument becomes more important than the accuracy of the argument. People sound rational without being rational. The fifth mechanism is confidence mimicry. Confidence is persuasive. Certainty is contagious. When someone speaks with conviction, we assume they must know something, and so we adopt that same tone of certainty to appear informed even when our understanding is shallow. Confidence becomes a performance rather than the result of comprehension. This creates an environment where everyone speaks with absolute certainty and very few people actually know what they're talking about. Public discourse becomes a theater. Everyone is acting. Almost no one is thinking. The sixth mechanism is tribal mimicry. When we belong to a group, political, ideological, cultural, we unconsciously adopt the thinking patterns of that group. Not because we have chosen them, but because belonging requires participation in the group's mental world. We mimic the group's outrage. We mimic the group's fears. We mimic the group's moral framing. We mimic the group's enemies. The tribe becomes the author of our thoughts. Independent thinking becomes betrayal. The seventh mechanism is cognitive autopilot. When ideas are repeated often enough, they no longer require conscious processing. The brain recycles them automatically. We begin to anticipate the correct response to any question. Before someone finishes speaking, our mind supplies the prefabricated answer. There is no moment of contemplation. No pause, no mental struggle. It is thinking that bypasses the thinker. The argument is already built, all we do is deliver it. The eighth and most troubling mechanism is self. Over time, mimicked thought starts to feel like original thought. We forget where the ideas came from. We forget who influenced us. We forget the emotional triggers that shaped our worldview. We may even believe we reached conclusions on our own when we have never deeply questioned them. The mind becomes a curator of borrowed thoughts, unaware of the borrowing. This is the quiet tragedy of the modern age. People are not only losing the ability to think independently, they're losing the ability to notice that they aren't. But mimicry is not destiny. It is simply the result of living in a world saturated with noise, narratives, and ready-made opinions. To break out of mimicked thinking, we do not need genius, we need awareness. The moment we recognize the difference between seeming thoughtful and being thoughtful, the mimicry loses its grip. We can begin asking, do I understand this, or am I repeating it? Independent thought does not vanish overnight. It fades quietly, beneath noise, beneath routine, beneath the pressure to conform. But just as it fades, it can be revived. The individual mind is never truly lost. It is simply overshadowed. And in a world where borrowed ideas echo endlessly, reclaiming your own voice becomes an act of self. Here are 5 essential ways to reawaken independent thinking in a world that rewards imitation. 1. Create space for mental silence. The independent thought begins in silence before it becomes words, arguments, or conclusions. Today, silence is rare. Every gap is filled with noise, notifications, feeds, messages, entertainment. Even when the world is quiet, the mind is still loud. But thinking requires a pause, a breath, a moment when the mind is not reacting, performing, or consuming. Silence allows thoughts to emerge that are not borrowed from someone else. It gives ideas the chance to settle, take shape, and expand. It returns you to your inner landscape, the place where your voice can be heard again. For many, the greatest barrier to independent thinking is not ignorance or distraction. It is simply the absence of quiet. 2. Slow down the intake of information. Modern life overwhelms us with speed. We skim, scroll, swipe, consume. Ideas pass by too quickly for us to reflect on any of them. Depth requires slowness because the mind needs time to process, compare, question, and understand. Reading slowly, watching thoughtfully, listening without multitasking. These are small acts of resistance against the acceleration of thought. When consumption slows, understanding begins. And when understanding begins, originality follows. Speed favors imitation. Slowness favors insight. 3. Ask questions instead of seeking immediate answers. Curiosity is the engine of independent thought, but in a world where answers are instant, curiosity has been quietly replaced by convenience. Why wrestle with a question when an algorithm can answer it immediately? Because questions shape the mind more than answers ever will. Asking why, and how, and what if, not rhetorically, not impatiently, but sincerely, creates the mental friction that leads to new perspectives. Independent thinkers are not defined by what they know. They are defined by what they question. Questions open doors that certainty keeps closed. 4. Diversify your sources. Break the echo chamber. A mind exposed only to familiar perspectives cannot grow. Echo chambers shrink thought by eliminating contrast, nuance, and alternative viewpoints. To think independently, you must deliberately step outside what feels comfortable. Read authors you normally wouldn't. Listen to thinkers outside your ideological tribe. Explore ideas that challenge your worldview, not to adopt them, but to understand them. Diversity of input creates diversity of thought. When the mind encounters contrasting ideas, it is forced to compare, to analyze, to synthesize. This inner friction is not a sign of confusion, it's the birthplace of clarity. The mind sharpens itself on difference. 5. Practice reflective solitude. Solitude is not loneliness, it is mental sovereignty. It is the space where ideas can be tested against your own reasoning instead of the expectations of others. When you think alone, you discover what you truly believe, what actually resonates, and what is merely noise from the outside world. Walk without headphones. Write without an audience. Sit with a thought long enough to feel its weight. In solitude, the mind becomes its own companion, not just an echo of its environment. Independent thinking does not grow in crowds. It grows in the quiet moments when you meet your own mind without distraction. The return of the individual mind. Reawakening independent thought is not about rejecting society or isolating yourself from the world. It is about reclaiming the mental territory that belongs only to you. It is about remembering that your thoughts do not have to mimic the thoughts around you. It is about rediscovering the quiet strength of having your own perspective, not because it is rebellious, but because it is yours. The world may reward imitation, but a fulfilled life rewards authenticity. And authenticity begins in the moments when you step away from the noise. Slow down, ask real questions, broaden your horizons, and sit with yourself long enough to hear your own voice again. Independent thinking is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not performative. It is quiet, steady, and deeply personal. And once it awakens, even softly, the mind begins to return home to itself. Independent thinking is often portrayed as laudable declaration, a dramatic stance, a public challenge to the crowd. But in reality, the courage to think alone is far quieter. It is subtle, private, invisible to most people. It does not announce itself. It does not demand applause. It simply begins with a decision. I am willing to hear my own mind, even when others cannot hear it with me. This quiet courage is rare, not because people lack intelligence, but because they fear the internal risks that independent thought demands. The risk of uncertainty, the risk of being misunderstood, the risk of changing, the risk of no longer fitting comfortably inside the expectations of others. To think alone is to step into a space without guaranteed approval. It is to value clarity over comfort, truth over ease, growth over belonging, and yet, it is one of the most important abilities a human can cultivate. The first kind of courage is the courage to question. Questions destabilize the mental ground beneath us. They dissolve certainty. They demand that we step away from the familiar narratives that keep us psychologically safe. To ask a real question, one you genuinely do not know the answer to, is an act of vulnerability. It means exposing the mind to new possibilities, new perspectives, even new identities. People avoid questioning, not because they lack curiosity, but because deep questions initiate transformation. And transformation is uncomfortable. But every independent thought begins with a question brave enough to unsettle us. The second kind of courage is the courage to stand apart internally, not necessarily externally. Standing apart doesn't mean shouting your beliefs from a mountaintop. It doesn't mean arguing, debating, or trying to convert others. It simply means having the willingness to hold a belief that others may not share, to think a thought that has not yet been validated by a group, to listen to your inner judgment, even when it whispers something different from the surrounding noise. You can stand apart quietly. Independence is not performance. It is posture. It is the quiet confidence that your mind is capable of forming its own conclusions. The third kind of courage is the courage to be wrong. This is perhaps the most difficult of all. Being wrong has become a public spectacle in the modern world. Screenshots, call-outs, collective outrage. The fear of error makes people hide behind safe, popular opinions. But error is part of thinking, part of learning, part of becoming. If you avoid thinking to avoid being wrong, you remain mentally frozen. You never stretch, never explore, never evolve. Independent thinkers are not more intelligent. They are simply more willing to be imperfect. They see mistakes not as humiliation, but as refinement. The fourth kind of courage is the courage to change your mind. Changing your mind is often harder than forming your own opinion in the first place. People cling to beliefs because those beliefs anchor their identity. But sometimes the truth lives outside the story we have been telling ourselves. To change your mind means confronting the possibility that you were wrong yesterday. It means letting go of a belief that once felt like a part of you. It means allowing yourself to grow even when growth feels like loss. But a flexible mind is a living mind, and a living mind must be willing to shed old skins. The fifth kind of courage is the courage to remain open. Openness requires strength, not the kind that pushes, but the kind that listens. It means allowing new ideas to enter without defensiveness. It means letting your worldview be porous, permeable, receptive. Closed minds feel safer, but they also become smaller. Open minds feel exposed, but they grow. The courage to remain open is the courage to continue learning long after others have stopped. The sixth kind of courage is the courage to take responsibility for your own thoughts. It is easy to repeat what others believe. It is easy to hide behind trends, tribes, authorities, influencers, algorithms. Borrowed opinions come with borrowed accountability. But independent thinking means owning your conclusions. If you reach them yourself, you also carry the responsibility for them. This responsibility is heavy, but it is also liberating. Because the moment you take ownership of your thoughts, you take ownership of your life. Asterisk the seventh and final kind of courage is the courage to be yourself. Not the curated version, not the tribal version, not the performative version, but the thinking, feeling, evolving self. Beneath it all, asterisk. Your mind is unique. Your way of seeing the world carries a texture, a depth, a perspective that no algorithm, no tribe, no collective voice can replicate. Independent thought is the process of discovering that self and granting it the right to exist, not loudly, not defiantly, but authentically. The courage to think alone is not about isolation. It is about integrity. It is about refusing to surrender your inner life to the expectations of the world. It is about trusting your quiet observations more than the noise around you. It is about becoming the author of your private universe, even if the outside world never understands it. And in that moment, in the moment when you allow your mind to belong to you and no one else, you reclaim something invaluable. Your freedom, not the loud, political kind, but the quiet, personal, irreplaceable freedom of being a thinking human being. The kind of freedom no one can give you and no one can take away.